I did my bachelor here, and I graduated from the TU Delft via Ahmedabad, India, and the Institute of Architecture in Venice. And my main research is in the architecture of barricades and how spaces can go against the state, both through objects and performance. And that's it. That's it. Yeah, that was it.
So, today, more than, let's say, images of nature and architecture, we're going to show you drawing. It's actually mainly the thing that we're obsessed with. So, in our studio, we're going to see architecture and we read it as independent from practice. And it's independent from the building itself. And that's why, for us, architecture historically has not simply become a practice, but a project. And what do we mean by project? We read project both as noun and verb. The root is from Latin projectum, which simply means something thrown forth. As a noun, we could define it within the discipline of architecture as a strategy on whose basis something must be produced or brought out. And therefore it addresses a potential future. And in doing so, it seeks to organize available means towards a possible end. Till actually 15th century, there was no difference between architecture and building. It was due to the, let's say, incredible work and rigorous attempts of architects such as Alberti and Vignola that defined and differentiated architecture as a project through plans and drawing from the building itself. And since then, architecture became a knowledge through which one could envision ideas for possible future. In fact, architectural knowledge developed through projects. And those projects became a means to give form to collective knowledge that is irreducible in form of building. In this way, the project has been always an ambivalent framework through which the forces at stake in development of the city and its architecture are made visible. And this brings us to the second category of project, the project as a verb, or to project, which for us it means and it defines as an act that defines a political intentionality. Here the project is read actually more as an action that establishes a precondition for engagement with the city and its architecture. It takes a position and projects it on the city. The project here is not always intended to bring a radical change or to resolve a situation. It sometimes is only to highlight the hidden conflicts. The following definition, our definition actually departs from the fact that most extreme example of architectural, let's say, projects in the history have been responses to open calls and competition. If for Vignola and Alberti is a plan or drawing, for us it's a competition and open calls that can be used as heuristic device to develop a knowledge of architecture. We can all remember radical projects or even buildings. For example, Le Corbusier Manifesto about contemporary city, which was actually a response to an open call for Salon Bloitem 1923. Or even Eiffel Tower, which is supposed to be a temporary exhibition building and stay there forever. Or even Mies German Pavilion in Barcelona. We can all remember Renzo Piano Rogers, Saint Pompidou, and also, of course, La Villette in Paris. But what the studio would stress is the tension between architecture imagined and architecture achieved. For us, this would be a driving force to help you to find your own position in the field. When you're out there next year, you have to define your own position right after. So the test ground for us would be the city of Rotterdam, which Charlotte would explain.
Yeah, so we see Rotterdam as the urban park of the 21st century, and hopefully that will become clear as I go through the presentation and also throughout the year. So this is a map of Rotterdam. As you can see, it's a delta landscape, but actually, as we will go through throughout the year, you'll see that the main kind of natural flows, historical flows, geographical flows of the city have been precisely replaced by logistical flows, motorways, canals, purely for logistical reasons. And that's actually a really good physical, real representation of the artificiality and the self-constructed landscape of Holland, and particularly Rotterdam, that is present throughout the study. It's also home to the largest port in Europe, 40 kilometers long. And in regards to Amsterdam, it is the second city, which has a particular social construct in relation to it. I think Sao Paulo to Rio, Manchester to London, you have like a big workers' mentality, you have this kind of underdog mentality that's really part of the city narrative of itself. In fact, it was once coined, the comparison between Amsterdam and Rotterdam was the comparison between the mother's lap and the desert, which we will definitely explore. We thought that was a really amazing way to say it. Holland itself we call the garden of capitalism. It is precisely caught between high neoliberal extreme capitalist processes and almost socialistic evidence that softens it. So we think about relaxed rules of different kinds, the welfare system, and whilst actually there is a strong radical and insurgent history to the Netherlands, that has indeed been softened by precisely urban development and architecture itself, I think more than anywhere else. As we probably all know, it is flat, extremely flat, in all senses, sociopolitically, physically, in many different ways. And this is an image of when Rotterdam itself was destroyed in the Second World War. It was absolutely annihilated. This is the premise for how we will speak about the urban park and the city itself in the future. Once it was flattened, there became a whole need to create an entire new city from scratch. You had this tabula rasa situation. And interestingly, what we declare as the way that they moved forward is the ideology to promote the city was architecture itself. So architecture wasn't a language to promote a social progression or a political ideology. It was actually almost like a closed circle without a center. It was just architecture to feed off itself, and the ideology was architectural development itself. Yeah, and you can see that as we go through the city. We will describe that as we go there on the trip, that the city reflects itself constantly, and it's constantly in a discussion with how it acts purely in an architectural manner. This is what they managed to create, and this is an image directly you can see in there where was that flattened war image, like the image of it being totally annihilated. And the city probably has a reputation, as you might know, that we say is kind of between reality, high futurist, modernity stuff, surreality, and what comes from that, and almost a non-reality, and that's what we want to look into. This is a really great image of the Erasmus Bridge opening, and almost a building that precisely mirrors and responds to the architectural surreality of the city. So you can see that in a perfect example there. The result of this, we say, is that everything flows in Rotterdam. Everything works. It was organized perfectly. They started from scratch. There's a highly segregated urban landscape. And actually it won this kind of 2015 Urbanism Awards or something for like Best City 2015. Which we want to highly challenge or break open. But this flow is not kind of a flow in a social sense. It's a flow from A to B. It's extremely logistical, it's extremely efficient, but we're kind of not content with that, really. It's also an archipelago of projects. It's almost objects that talk to themselves. So if you see here, this is black, this is precisely the location of the bomb image that I showed before. There's a set of like random, interesting objects that kind of talk to themselves, and they don't really talk to each other. And this image of the zebras is actually a painting from when the bombs did hit and the zoo broke open, and all these zebras were like walking around the city. And I thought it was spot on to talk about what we want to talk about. So, whilst every architecture is almost accepted, everything's possible in Rotterdam from the start because architecture is the ideology itself, we're still not content. Every attempt is almost like a failure. And these objects don't really talk to the urban landscape that flows around them, and they don't really talk to each other. And there's something that we see as lacking in that. One of the main social results that we see is almost that gentrification doesn't exist, which has huge socio-political impacts that we will discuss in a lot of depth. I can't really go into now. And also subcultures are marginalized and heavily softened. This is a a video, a hip-hop video where you can see this kind of like ghetto image actually with like high, extremely clean infrastructure flowing around it, and this was precise representation of this tension that we're discussing. So whilst it has everything, I mean, we were able to do everything, it was the architect's playground, it still lacks this, lacks something, and we want to look into that. And that's where the urban park comes in, as a representation both of Rotterdam itself and also as a tension between landscape and object. Between flow, between what moves around these objects, and between the objects themselves, which I think is our position as architects in the city. And it's also a place that has offers a multitude of scales and programs for the projects that you might like to develop. And we'd like to say now that because it's this place that almost has these things but we're still not satisfied, we don't aim to particularly find solutions or resolve the situation. I think we're very interested in breaking open the conflicts that are there, that we know of, that are kind of bubbling under this kind of perfect skin. One might like to say that our limits as architects are exposed precisely in the city, because we were able to do everything and we didn't, we missed something somehow. I would declare that maybe it's some kind of trap. In terms of thinking of like capitalist forces that go on about their business, we have this kind of perfect, eccentric city, kind of flat, and yeah, I wonder if it's a trap laid down for us somehow. And that is precisely the metaphor for the playground itself, no? Containment of leisure, containment of extreme activity, in order that something else might not happen outside of those confines. And that's exactly where we're kind of looking into.
Yeah. Just briefly explaining how we're going to have this trip together. We divided the whole year into 2 symmetrically mirrored semesters. We start with the group work as